Welcome to the Fifth Gate Podcast. We have thrown around the idea of a podcast for years, but we finally made it happen as we were stuck together on a 10-hour road trip home from a horse show. Our passion is the Icelandic horse and all aspects of the worldwide community that surrounds this breed. Here, we come together as equestrian professionals to share our hardest lessons, our biggest wins, and our future hopes for Icelandic horsemanship. Our conversations aim to educate, inspire, and grow all people like us who love Icelandic horses, from enthusiasts and amateurs to trainers, competitors, and field specialists. Welcome to the first solo episode of the Fifth Gate Podcast. We are going to experiment with this format every once in a while when we have a topic to talk about that deserves special attention or is especially relevant. And that is why, in this first solo episode, we are going to talk about importing Icelandic horses. I believe this topic applies to any viewer or listener that lives outside of Iceland, because if you are interested in Icelandic horses, you are most likely going to consider or have already considered what that process of importing a horse looks like for you. Carrie and I have helped in the process of importing many Icelandic horses over the years, whether it be overseeing the process as they acclimated on our own farms, or we advised in the process as they acclimated on our clients' farms. We have seen some trends and patterns and gained just a lot of experience from how all of those have gone. And with that, we have put together 10 points of consideration that we think are pretty applicable to anybody's import process. Now, I think it goes without saying, but is worth saying. Every acclimation process is going to be different because every horse is individual. We can't assume or expect the acclimation process to go any particular way. In this process, we cannot have too much empathy for the horse. I compare it to abducting. This sounds dramatic. It is the equivalent of abducting the horse into a spaceship and them getting off and landing on Mars. If you have ever been to Iceland, you know the landscape is truly otherworldly. They have very few trees. Their infrastructure looks different. Their horses even smell different. The climate is very different from most of the places we live. Also, the horsemanship and just the daily management of the horses is very different from what we have or what things look like in our barns. It's not just the people changing around the horses, it is everything changing around the horses when we take them out of Iceland. So, with that, like I said, we cannot have enough empathy. And because of that, it really wouldn't be fair to the horses to expect it to go any certain way. It is remarkable how well they handle it for the most part. That just, I think, is a testament to this amazing breed, the Icelandic horse, and how resilient they are, how sensible they are, how naturally adaptable the breed is as they've evolved. So that does speak to that as well. But let's go ahead and get into these key points of consideration. I've got 10, and we will start with number 1, which is decompression and settling in. There are many international competitors that travel with their horses all the time. They don't remove their horses from a disease-free country that looks quite as different from Iceland, but they travel back and forth from the US to Europe or all over Europe or even to Australia. They think that the jet lag for horses does not usually come until about the 2-week mark. Our practice, our common practice with the horses that we have imported or helped import, we stick to little to no training in the first month, especially in the first 2 weeks. We just let the horses be horses. We let their immune systems figure out what's going on. We let their minds figure out what's going on. We let them just process their surroundings. And ideally, we also keep them with other imports at that time, just so that they have that social need met and, yeah, that social stimulation that also keeps them a little bit more mentally sound. We keep them not only isolated from our horses on our farm, but we also do very little with them. And even in that first month, We might only get on them 2 to 4 times, or maybe even not at all, maybe just groundwork. And moving on to point number 2, immunization considerations. Because the Icelandic horses coming out of Iceland are coming out of a disease-free country, at the very least, we keep them quarantined or isolated from other horses until they are fully vaccinated. We recommend that you monitor your horse's health carefully. Typically, in monitoring their symptoms, we check their temperature regularly in between vaccinations. We watch what their stool looks like, what their demeanor is. If we can measure water intake or monitor water intake, then we try to do that as well as food intake, just to make sure that there are no changes, that the horses are responding appropriately to the vaccinations. Point number 3, adjustments to new customs, new daily management customs. In the US, most horses are led from space to space, or whether it be from the stall to the paddock or from the paddock to the field. In Iceland, there isn't a lot of leading. While the horses know how to lead, that is just not something that is a part of their daily routine quite as much as it is here in the US. They are used to being herded out with other horses or pushed with groups from space to space. Because of that, we have found that there is an adjustment time to get used to being led so much. It's very typical for me to almost have a 5-minute walk to the pasture in some cases with horses. And I know when I was working in Iceland, that was definitely not the case. If the walk was a 5-minute walk, then we were just herding them with the truck with the group of horses that they go out with to the next place. That is something to consider, something to not be surprised by when your horse acts a little weird while you're trying to lead them in a halter and lead rope outside. The ground, the soil, the fences, even the vehicles, the buildings, the trees, those are all things that they are taking in as they are also getting used to being led so much. Point number 4, this is sort of expanding on point number 3, which is just to consider all basic daily management things as new experiences. Pretend like your import is a young horse experiencing all of these things for the first time, just because you really don't know what all the horse your import has experienced or not experienced in Iceland. So something we find very common is that a lot of the horses are pretty new to fly spray or spray bottles, and we never expect any import horse to be familiar with what a spray bottle is and what is happening to them as we spray them. And we fly spray all the time here. Horses get fly sprayed every day in the summer before they get turned out to the field because we have such a big bug problem. That is a very big change for an import horse. They also are usually pretty unfamiliar with hoses, water hoses, because in Iceland, water hoses are not that common at all. It is important that you introduce them in a way that sets them up for success and builds confidence, and they can feel relaxed about these experiences every time they happen in the future. Point number 5, riding spaces look very different outside of Iceland. In Iceland, it is pretty typical to have smaller riding arenas just because the infrastructure is so expensive to build because of all of the different codes from the extreme weather that they get. In other countries, it's much more typical to see these huge indoor riding halls that can be very overwhelming for your import horse to enter into an indoor space where they are ridden that is just swallowing them with so much space to move around. That can be different for them. Riding on trails can be different for them. Riding outdoors in Iceland, as you may know, consists of a lot of longer, straighter paths that do have some variation in hills, but not quite as much as some areas of our country or other countries. Having to ride a little bit slower and with more turns is a very different experience for an import horse. Point number 6. This is a big one. Trees can be very scary. I remember the first time I imported a horse, I was so shocked at how terrified she was when we turned her out in her paddock where she was going to stay isolated as she acclimated. She was terrified of the trees that surrounded the paddock. And that's because they were probably 3 to 4 times the height of any tree she had ever seen before, but she had maybe never even seen a tree before because there really aren't that many in Iceland. They also, as you can imagine, are not familiar with riding in trees or underneath a tree canopy. That is a very new experience for them to be moving around underneath trees. And then one thing that we have really had to consider or desensitize horses to is the sound of the scraping of tree branches on your helmet. That is something that happens very often while we are trail riding, is probably something that rarely ever happens in Iceland and can be a very foreign sound that horses just can't quite make sense of because it's a noise that they hear that is right over top of them, but it's not something that they necessarily feel. So, something to consider before you take your import on its first trail ride is they've most likely never been ridden under trees. They've most likely never heard a branch or even felt a branch scrape up against them. Take caution, have empathy, and enjoy the trail. Point number 7 is hand walking might not be the best idea. I am not saying that that is always the case. It depends on sort of how the horse was started, just the different kind of handling that the horse got, but it is not very common to hand walk horses a lot in Iceland. So while they are well trained and they have good manners on the ground, they are not completely relaxed walking next to a human on the ground. They are more relaxed and confident when they are being led by another horse or they are following another horse because that is typically how they were moved or how they were taught, how they were how they were trained to build their confidence. The ponying and the herding is a very familiar experience for your import horse. The leading and walking around and checking out new sites with a human next to them is not so much a familiar experience. Point number 8, summer eczema considerations. Yes, Icelandic horses are more susceptible to Swedish or to summer eczema, which has not so much to do with a genetic susceptibility as much as it has to do with an immune system susceptibility. Just because the climate is so different, the climate in Iceland is extremely temperate, and you come to a climate that maybe has larger swings in temperature, and with that comes a lot more bugs, a lot more pollens and environmental changes, humidity changes, and mold growth within the climate. With all of those things, it is so important that you do not let the horse's histamine reaction get out of control. Our recommended practice that we have always done with import horses is to turn them out during the day but to bring them in at night because at dawn and at dusk are those high times for the bugginess and the itchiness. And if you can avoid your horse, your import horse, being out during those times, then you are more likely to just keep the histamine response or keep their immune system less inflamed. Summer eczema blankets can also be very helpful. It certainly could help having a summer eczema blanket at least the first summer that you import an Icelandic horse, just to try to keep their exposure very gradual. And fly spray also, like I said, in the summer, we always fly spray our horses before they go outside. Point number 9 is training regression. We have found that often horses that are imported sort of experience a regression in their training or some old behaviors come back to the surface once they are imported to a new country. Now, that said, it is important to choose a horse whose trainer you have a good relationship with in Iceland, or if it's not a trainer you have a relationship with, it's a trainer who your trainer has a relationship with, a trainer whose practices you are familiar with so that you can better ensure that there is going to be a smooth transition process for your horse. You can also collaborate with that trainer in Iceland who knows your horse to maybe strategize how to resolve the issue because it was an issue that they had worked through with that horse previously. And finally, point number 10. In Iceland, because of the more extreme terrain, Icelandic horses are typically kept shod on factory stamped iron shoes on all 4 feet. While we encourage you to explore your own practices in hoof care and hoof management, we do not recommend riding them and training them initially barefoot or with alternative shoeing, just because if they have been kept with 4 shoes on in training, their entire training career, suddenly switching the balance of their feet and the comfortability potentially of their feet, as well as changing the everything else around them, can make them feel, for one, physically imbalanced compared to what they are used to. It can also just add another piece of change that does not help them in the acclimation process. Okay, that is all 10 points, and there are many more, but these are just the things that we find are either common questions or just considerations that come up in pretty much every import that we help in the process of. I know this is a lot to consider. I don't want this to discourage you from importing an Icelandic horse, because one of the amazing things about importing Icelandic horses is you truly do get a piece of Iceland. You are also investing in diversity and variability of the breed, and you are bringing great bloodlines into your country and investing in the economy of the Icelandic horse. While it is a lot to consider, there are a lot of delicate pieces of the import process that we have to take special care of, but it is truly an incredible, life-changing experience, and we totally recommend it. If you are in the US and you are interested in Icelandic horses and importing Icelandic horses, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to help you in that process. We do have partnerships with trainers all over Iceland who we trust, and we have worked with time and time again with great success. Reach out to us if you are interested, and I hope this video helps. If you also have any other questions or you would like to discuss some of these things, please also reach out, because we would love to hear from you. Thank you for listening to the Fifth Gate podcast. I know you've heard this on other channels, but it really is so important that you like and subscribe on whatever platform you're listening through, or all of them for that matter. We would also love to hear from you on social media. Please send us ideas, suggestions. Let us know what you're enjoying right now, so we can continue to make content you want to watch and hear. Thank you again for your support, and we will see you next time on the next episode of the Fifth Gate podcast.